So thanks for having us. We're really excited to be here. Mike and I have each done this presentation on our own, never together. I've done it in front of a room of agents, so we're hoping to marry it up with the great transformation that happened from this engineering team and how it delivered a real transformation to our business. So the slides you'll see up front, these are literally, can you see this? There we go.
There we go.
Okay. These are things we share with our agent population. So I wanted to start a little bit, for those of you not in our industry, we're in business insurance. Middle market specifically is what some of this is aimed at. And so some of the patterns of that look a little different than maybe some direct-to-consumer type things, and we just wanted to talk about that. So in our industry, our customers are really different. So we underwrite everything in their business, from their fleets of vehicles, their portfolio of properties, to the art on their walls. So this isn't something we can do kind of algorithmically. It's pretty bespoke. And we've been at this problem in insurance for 40 years, 50 years. It's kind of like the same business problem has existed. What's changed is the innovation, the innovative approach, and the technology that we have powering it. So you'll see that. Mike will walk us through. When we talk about it, as we mentioned, there's a really robust data set, and that's really where the innovation is in this problem space. And so these are the kinds of solutions we talk about that we've been able to bring to our partners because of the technical stack powering it, and you'll be able to see how we're connecting this experience. But they don't really want to, our partners in our case are agents and brokers working on behalf of the customers, and we're all here to deliver a promise. This promise is just data, pretty much underwriting the GDP. From a business insurance perspective. So what we want to go through today is the technical stack supporting all this. And you can see that over time, we've been at this for several years. And marrying up this work with the business is what has allowed us to kind of become an industry leader in some of these, in this space. So I'll just highlight something here. You'll see, we've actually implemented a lot of these capabilities that bring a lot of value out to our partners. And what we're going to talk about here, we're going to highlight the experience. So a large, complicated experience with a lot of constituents. And what we're trying to be a game changer on is simplifying how we do business and how we bring that value to the market. So I'll hand it over to Mike.
Okay, so as Stephanie said, we've been at this for a little bit. And in order to meet these business objectives, we had to go through a cultural and engineering transformation. We realized in order to reach a desired state that we had to adopt modern engineering and architectures, engineering practices and architectures. But that realization, this implementation, and frankly the desired state wasn't figured out overnight. We figured it out over time by really two key principles: constant alignment with our business objectives, focusing and making sure we're tight on what the business wants to deliver. Second, constantly challenging ourselves, looking for ways to use new technologies and those new principles, delivery principles, to optimize our delivery and effectively do it quicker. So it all started with the need for an internal underwriting workstation. This was to provide a unified UI experience for both underwriters and operations. These are two different roles of employees at Travelers. We started with what I'll call aggregation level capabilities. And if you think about the process of a pre-sale and a post-sale, the middle, the transactional piece, well, those were done in other systems. But we needed all that data to start with. And we had an exceptional data team. And I don't just say that because my wife was on the data team. Partly, I do say that because she was on the data team. But they did an exceptional job by going out to various different systems and writing ETLs and batches and landing it into, at that point, a relational database. Now, the engineering teams primarily focused on services and UIs at this point in time. This original delivery was a tremendous success for Travelers. It provided significant business value. At this point in time, we were delivering on a quarterly cadence. So we'd all go in on a weekend. We would do the deployment. Hopefully it works. And then we would get feedback over time. And that feedback would be over months, it could be. And we'd do it again. we knew, even though we had a tremendous success, that wasn't going to be good enough. And that we needed to do vastly different operations and vastly different ways to execute. And so this is when we introduced domain-driven design. We created domain teams, insurance domain teams, long-standing teams, focused on problems within that side of that domain. Now, over time, they would develop their own ubiquitous language and specific understanding of the problems they were trying to solve. We found over time that because they were focused and centralized and partnering with our team leads or product owners, traditionally known as, they were able to come up with better engineering solutions and solve the business problems quicker. Today, on some of our calls, it's hard to distinguish between who's the engineer and who's the business person. So it's been pretty cool to see. But that's not all we did during this phase. We started to look and deploy microservices. But we didn't do microservices because they were cool or we thought we would just try something. No, we wanted smaller, deployable assets that we can test and control the radius of change. And if something went wrong, the blast radius of change. Using things like Docker and processes like Blue, Green, and Canary, we were able to dramatically shift our delivery timeline from that quarterly cadence to today based on the feature size. And I preface that because I don't want to get in too much trouble. Based on that feature size, we could do same-day delivery. But at this point, we weren't here. We had a bottleneck, and that bottleneck was the database. And really from two different aspects. One, the coordination of change. Working with another team, those domain teams would have to go out and work with the data team to go and make that change. They would have to work with a modeler, and the modeler would have to work with the DBA to promote it. And so you had this promotional and all that overhead. And then second, more importantly, the understanding of those ETLs. What was the business? We knew that transactional stuff was coming. And so we needed our domain teams to understand that. And this is when we introduced the database inside the domain. And Mongo, where we started to use Mongo. Now, when we started using Mongo, these domain teams were also doing production support. And so we'd used it for non-mission critical things. We used it for production metrics and things of this nature, nothing business critical. But we quickly realized we can use this for transactional applications. And so we would start some new work, and we did that. By going through this process, we found that we were solving the same database problems using relational techniques. And I have one story specifically, and the gentleman that used to work with us, Jeff, and I was working on something. And we had whiteboards at the place that we were working on, and we brought in a data analyst, a data architect. And she was fantastic. She really understood this business domain. And she's sitting there on the whiteboard with Jeff and I, and she's writing, no, it's like this, and she's drawing the data flow, and she ends up literally on the ground writing the answer. And Jeff and I are looking like, oh my God, what are we gonna do? So when you're in a situation like that, you tend to solve problems the same ways you're used to solving them. And when we started using Mongo, we used one-to-many collections, and we were using joins. And it's fine, and it worked. And the complexity inside the microservices was a little bit more than it needed to be. And so we learned these things. And that was absolutely key as we moved to the sunset of those existing transaction capabilities now. Right? So although in those other systems that we had out there that were doing that transactional work, we now could bring those inside the domains. And the expertise we gained from doing those new initiatives, we learned an awful lot. We understood our CI/CD pipelines, how to deploy indexes, how we could do performance testing now inside a domain and not have to do that massive coordination across a bunch of different teams. And so it really accelerated that sunset effort. So at this point, a lot of those legacy applications we were able to turn off and bring that into the unified workstation. But there were some applications that weren't going away. And we needed specifically policy information to complete the transaction process. So we had to come up with a different approach to not rely on batch processing, not rely on ETLs. And this is our policy aggregation domain. So essentially, this is a CQRS pattern from 19 different RQIs, or 19 different systems, various different levels of databases, landing using Apache Kafka and landing the data in Mongo. And Stephanie, you could say a few words about what this has provided.
Yeah, so this has been game-changing for us in what we're bringing out to our partners. So we talked about how the business insurance middle market transaction is super complex, flowing a lot of data, and it's asynchronous by design. So you have agents working with customers, you have our underwriters working with the agents, you have our risk control teams going out and meeting with the customer. So you have a lot of complicated transaction going on. But what this sets up for is for us to understand transactions in the life cycle of a policy and being able to stream from our data sets that help us know who the customer is, who the agent is, the employee team engaged with that agent and with that customer, and what experience they've been through. This is setting up for, we'll talk about it in a little bit more about like the different channels we have, but this really has set the stage for everything we're bringing out to the market and has been the most palatable change that our partners can see in the way they're engaging with us.
So from a technical perspective, we need to transact against these different systems. Now, traditionally, they have performance problems, right? They're not made for some of our strategic capabilities, and they don't have robust APIs to call. So using this CQRS pattern was really helpful to landing that there, using the eventual consistency of this CQRS pattern, as well as the high availability and low latency of Mongo behind the scenes. So the business driver, all of this, but was also from a technical perspective, we couldn't support 24/7 availability, those types of things. So very, very, very key. Fast forward to our current state now, right? Many different domains. Typically, they all have databases, and we use APIs and events to segment those different domains. And just by the numbers, for this particular suite or this section, this isn't all of it, Travelers, by the way. But for this particular section, 30 different domains, 400 some odd microservices, and over 2,000 production deployments last year. Okay. So significant improvement from where we started. So let's talk about now our current efforts and how this architecture, these implementations are supporting it. And the slides are a little messed up, but it's okay.
I get it.
Yeah. So let's just talk about, this is a very simple view of a transaction and what a business transaction means from an insurance perspective. So when I say business transaction, I'm talking about, I want to change my policy. I want a new policy. I want to renew my policy. Those are types of business transactions. We have an application, another application called Work Management that has the playbook to say when we need to execute this transaction, here are the steps that you need to execute, to fulfill. And people right now get assigned tasks to fulfill that transaction. So for this particular example, let's say I'm the first actor. There is that change of policy transaction comes in. I get assigned to do process 1, to do process 2, and Stephanie has to do process 3. And then I'm going to finish it off for process 4. Very simple flow. Very simple flow. We have, because of this work management application, we have the means to understand over APIs and events when a task is assigned, when a task is complete, when a process is complete, and we systematically can do that, or we can have them do that over the UIs. But it's all highly available, eventually consistent, using those same mechanisms we kind of talked about with Kafka and Mongo. But this is going to play key into what we have to do. Now, from a triggering a business transaction, Stephanie will talk about a little bit more, but a business transaction can be triggered by many different ways. It could be a timed event. It's 6/1, it's time to renew your policy. It could be someone going on a screen and clicking a form. It could be an email that comes in that says, I want to change it, and we may need some NLP to figure out what policy we're going to change. So those types of things. But from a user's perspective, traditionally, I'm going to get that task, and I'm going to go through all my domains. I don't know their domains. I don't care. I'm trying to fulfill a job. I'm trying to go through some UIs, some executions, and I'm using the services that the domain teams provided, but I'm moving through those just to complete that UI flow. And we know that's not going to be good enough. And you could talk a little bit more about.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a
channels.
little bit about what this feels like externally. So the change we've made internally, we're lucky as a company. We have a lot of offerings and we have a lot of underwriting expertise. It used to feel like engaging with us like you were working with 19 different companies. And you used to have to know who to go to if you wanted the coverage. So we can have customers who need 6, 7 lines of insurance, but they only need to go to us for one. That's gone. We have this vision of one customer served by one team, and really with the ability to have that team have a cohesive way, our internal team have a cohesive way to engage. That means we're bringing much more comprehensive solutions to our customers, and we're a true partner to the agent to help identify the risks that the partner has. So that's a huge game changer for us, and that's what we think is a big advantage, and it was powered by this architecture.
So if we think about now a digital workflow, and that's probably, I don't know if that's the best term to describe it, but if we think about supporting different channels other than a UI, right? We're going to have APIs through the agency management system. We're going to have those timed events, those types of things. We traditionally we're making the shift. I think anything from a UI perspective is high touch. We're requiring a person to see it. That's our vision, right? And that's hopefully not the norm. So we need 2 levels of orchestration, and this is what we're working on. Right? We need business transaction orchestration, that playbook, that work management set of tasks that say, if I want to change my policy, this is what I need. And so we need to systematically orchestrate those events and those tasks. But we also need process levels. So here, we'll give you an example. Let's say we get that change policy in, and it's an email. The first step of that email is we have to run some NLP on that thing to determine, well, what's the policy in there? Who is this? That is a task. We know that is the first step of it. So at an orchestration process level, we need to hand that off to an orchestrator. Now, we don't have the playbook as much as we do at the transaction level. We don't know what the users are actually doing inside the screens to fulfill some of these transactions. And the NLP may not be the greatest example of that. They will probably go to a search screen and look things up, right? So NLP is the solution for that rather than the problem. But we don't know those individual tasks, but thankfully we have the engineering teams. We have those domain teams. We have the expertise because we shifted to domain-driven design that understand how the business functions now at that lower level. And so we could take advantage of all their good work and all that understanding and the services and the microservices that we wrote over the years. And all that work has positioned us now nicely from that domain perspective and from a technology point of view to start tapping into some of these different things.
Yeah, and so domain-driven design supplemented by the experience design we're looking at, because what we found is, so whenever anyone hears digital, they think of a fancy website, but our partners, a lot of them have actually invested in their own ecosystem, and they don't want to leave it to do business with us. If you think of the size of some of the accounts we're working on, there's no way you could feasibly build a website where they just fill in a lot of questions. That's not gonna fly. So what we have is the underpinning of all this workflow and all this experience that can plug into whatever the partner wants. So if they're engaging with us in a headless way, if they're engaging with us via UIs, it's very important to us, we're still offering the same product, the same experience, and providing that consistently. And then what we've also noticed with some of our bigger, more mature partners, you don't know where they've exactly invested. Like Mike talked about a submission coming in. Well, a lot are obviously investing in submissions and trying to make that easy because it's a very complicated kind of offering that we have to get across. But some haven't invested on the front door. They actually have nice workflow internal tools, and they just want our status, and they just want our proposal back. And because we've built that kind of workflow capability across, we can plug that in where we need to based on what our partner needs.
Yeah. So if we just think about the orchestration pieces for a minute, the domain teams, when I say process level orchestration, for discussion purposes, think of it, the discussion purposes today, think about it as a separate microservice that has a set of steps in there, right? Those teams are managing that. And we have a framework that does over various APIs and events and traceability and stuff. We do have some things like that. But they manage that process orchestration just like any other asset they have. And they deploy it and they change it, just like anything we have. From a state perspective, when a process is invoked, we capture what did you come in with? What decisions did you make? What rule results did you come from? And we'll tap into why we do that later. But that state is very dynamic, and it could change by process based off the business transaction, right? So we need a database that is flexible to be able to support these different types of models. And that's another big thing where Mongo has helped us. But if we were to take a look at this, and if you certainly have seen how we've been executing, if we were to execute this, implement this business transaction from the start to the finish, that's a heck of a lot of work. And it's a heck of a lot of coordination. And I just spent the first, 10, 15 minutes telling you how we don't like to do that, right? So that's not how we're gonna implement this. It's, thankfully, we're gonna leverage that work management application. And because of how we have our frameworks and have our setup, we can do that. So I'll walk through an example of actually how we're doing this. So let's talk about that change that came in. It came in through the front door. And the first step was looking at that email and determining, running some NLP and saying, I'm gonna extract the policy information out of that. And so it extracts that out, goes to that process orchestrator. That state is saved, we have a full visibility. The return back to the business transaction orchestrator is, this is your policy, this is who you are. Now the next step in the business transaction is go make the change to the policy, but we have a problem. We didn't implement that. That's not ready. So that business process now actually is using the task, and Stephanie is gonna go and do that manually. She's gonna go to this screen, she's gonna go and make that change. And the business transaction is gonna be waiting. Obviously this is all asynchronous, right? For this particular use case. There are synchronous flows that we will support, but in this particular use case, we'll tell whoever is waiting, if they're waiting on a screen, that they need to come back, or it's processing. We're trying to think async all the way through. And I know from a business, there's other reasons why this helps.
Someone asked us before this why we thought we were able to get so far with this, and I think it's a couple things. One is, there is no separation, like Mike said, between business and technology in this. It's interactive. And then the iterative implementation. So we're being really opportunistic about where partners are and who's willing to work with us to be able to see the outcome. And partners can be internal or external, but we're using that to slice through where we're making this change. That's allowed us to prove the value of it because you could see the implementation. In the industry, it's been a little interesting. Like I mentioned, this problem, some of the problems in our space have been around 30, 40 years. The only difference is modern technology and modern practices. That means sometimes we're ahead and we have low adoption. But it's still allowed us to kind of like keep our foot in the industry and steer where they're going because we can pace and change. And if someone comes to us and they have a ton of investment lined up and they're ready to work with us, that's how we pick what we're exposing, what we're adopting, what we're changing. So it's helped culturally as well with our internal.
Yeah, so many different aspects of how we're doing it, rolling it out, again, taking advantage of all that domain expertise we've built up over the years, focusing and changing that culture. So, and just to wrap up the example, once that task is closed or once that process is complete, again, it's all using Apache Kafka, it's all listening to events. The business transaction orchestrator will pick it up and then resume automatic processing. Again, to pinpoint where we want to make the investment and how and where do we want to take the transaction and where to make that investment. So, last step, and boy, that really...
We could spend like 3 years here.
Yes, we could. We probably will spend 3 years here. This is more of just the whole ecosystem of all the frameworks and the pieces that need to run for this, and I'll just quickly go over it. We just don't process one transaction at a time. That would be a little bit too easy, right? We need to be able to take books of business or renewal books. Think about, okay, at 6/1, I have 10,000 policies I want to renew. And when those 10,000 policies are done and completed, we need to take an action. So we essentially have a distributed transaction manager that handles those particular use cases. Also, from a state perspective, I mentioned that at the process level, at the process orchestration, the domain level orchestration, all the state is saved. Well, that's also true at the business transaction level. We capture everything. Travelers loves data. It loves their data, our data, it loves your data, it loves anybody's data. So we capture everything, and we use that audit state that's stored inside Mongo to do a lot of the analysis that Stephanie is talking about. It helps us to identify, and we can tell the business, where are your bottlenecks? What is taking long? If this manual process is taking 5 minutes, but this other manual process is taking 3 days, well, maybe we should focus on the 3 days ones if that's more valuable. So it helps us make better decisions and understand the total flow of the business. Also using things like charts, we can give real-time visibility into business flows. I mean, this is a huge benefit from our business perspective. They can actually see the living, breathing system, real live time, in real time. Of course, we're tapping into models and AI. I mentioned NLP. We're using those and trying to bring that kind of technology inside the domains. The data scientists should be part of the engineering teams, and we're trying to move towards that to help assist with decisions or make decisions in some places. And then finally, rules are everywhere. We have rules in every which way in orchestrators, and we have a rules framework that allows us to essentially version rules. Think about a semantic versioning set of a rule set. And our orchestration framework could target these specific rules. Using our framework and being able to target a different rule set allows us to do a simulation of those rules. And what I mean by that is because we have all the state, we can look back and say, what happened over the last 30 days if I change my deductible threshold from 10,000 to 20,000? What would the actual output be? And we can actually see the real output of that running it through simulation. Very powerful tools for our business to execute on. And so just in closing, bringing it back to pay for the lunch that I had today. How has the database helped us, right? And really in a lot of different ways. But really 3 different pieces. That design flexibility, the dynamic schemas, the engineering teams being able to come up with those things, reducing those dependencies, using a language and a frame and a style that they're used to, that we're all used to. That aggregation pipeline is just simply awesome as well. From the CQRS perspective, like that low latency, high availability, another business example. We had a proposal generation capability that was taking up to 15 minutes to generate a document. Now, there was a lot of problems with it, but most of the problems was going to get the data. We got that time down to less than 5 seconds. So massive improvements in Mongo and this database significantly help. And then finally, again, empowering the domain teams, empowering them to be able to make and truly be full stack. It just keeps on adding value every day. So with that, hopefully we covered a decent amount of information. I know we went probably relatively quickly, but hopefully we can answer any questions you have. Yeah, so I think between the first slide and the policy aggregation sunset, we just finished up sunset last year, maybe 4 years, right? Over time, yeah, 4 or 5 years, something like that. But we've been working on the orchestration piece with COVID and stuff, you know, we took a little bit of a hit, but yeah, about 4 years. Yes, sir. To document our system. So a lot of the documentation is inside our domain teams, right? So we're actually talking about, at an enterprise level, a DocOps capability where we can aggregate documentation together and bring them into a centralized standard site. But a lot of the documentation is at the domain level. Go ahead, sir, in the front. Oh, yes.
Oh, this is on now. What are some of the lessons you learned from this that maybe you could help other people kind of say, well, we had problems doing this and we pivoted towards this?
I think it's more of a, don't be afraid to make mistakes. You're not going to get it perfect. I think constantly challenge and iteration over it, and You know,
Get to the business outcomes.
and yes, and tied to and be tied to the business outcomes as much as possible. I mean, I think that's really, it's truly that embedding that relationship has been key. But you know, you have to. We always want to do things in an agile fashion, but we should be agile ourselves. Yes, sir.
From an organizational standpoint, who owns the event bus? Like, is that shared across all of the domain teams, or is there a specific like event bus team or something?
So in business right now, no. So in business, so it's a Kafka cluster that we are actually running on-prem just for business insurance. But at the enterprise level, they're trying to expand it out for like the whole enterprise. But it's at a organizational level, I guess I would say, right? So there's many different organizations and travelers. So there's probably, I don't know, what is it? How many teams? 60 teams? Something like that using it?
And does an individual team own the cluster, like the operational status of the cluster?
This gentleman right here keeps us breathing. He threw me a softball. You see that? What did you learn? I learned to pay you.
So what's the size of the database or the transaction? I mean, the MongoDB.
Well, many different databases, right? So what's the largest database we have?
Yes.
So our policy collection, which we just started building for the last couple of years, maybe the last 2 years, is around, Arnav, help me, it's about 2 terabytes? Something like that, 2 terabytes as far as like disk size. As far as number of documents, I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, we capture multiple levels of information. I didn't really even say this as part of if you think about that pattern of the 19 different systems, like the data model from those 19 different systems are vastly different. If we had to do that from a relational perspective, it would have been a heck of a modeling effort, right? So landing that data in a more natural way has been huge. But we stored the data like latest snapshots, and then at certain business processes, we make a copy of it for that policy. And that policy one is pretty much the largest one we have.
As an IT guy, I would like to know that what kind of a performance problem or scalability issues or anything you had, the lessons learned?
Yeah, so not necessarily from the database. I mean, we have a lot of microservices that are handling our events, and certainly making sure we have the right commit times and processing times within a consumer. That's we have to, and making sure we're doing the right level of performance testing. And the fact that we're kind of decentralized and more focused at a domain level, those bounded context teams or these smaller teams, they control their own ecosystem. So performance testing is like very, very, very important within that smaller domain team. It's not like hey, we're going to test these 17 domains and do one performance test. So it's very more focused. So I would say more on the eventing side, making sure you have the right consumer configuration of that. But from a database perspective, it's been we haven't seen any problems there. We're using Atlas, so we've seen some scaling take place and come back down and all that kind of stuff based on load.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes. Well, whoever.
For the rules framework that you mentioned, is
Yeah.
that something you're leveraging Mongo to manage in version, or is that something off the shelf like Drools or something?
No, it's not off the shelf. It's proprietary, and it is not using we're using Mongo to store the results of the rules, but not the actual rules themselves. That's stored somewhere else and versioned somewhere else. Actually, in a source code repository.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Pretty interesting topic, that's why.
Thank you.
So since you have attached a data store at each domain,
Yeah.
like, are you getting this data into like central data store or something? So do you get like an aggregated view from end to end?
Yeah. Look at that, the analytic. So we had an awesome workshop with these guys, and I got to say, they're tremendous partners, right? But we were talking about that, and there's a whole analytical value stream, we call it, which looks across all these domains, and we're trying to find, right now, the short answer of that is yes. They're traditionally listening to events from the domains, from those business domains, those transactional domains, and they're putting the data in, they're creating their own data store. We're trying to find more optimal ways to do that.
Great, thank you.
Yep. But I will say that there's also a focus of trying to do analytics inside the domains. The data is there. And stuff like charts is providing team leads, product owners, to be able to look and say, well, how many proposals did I just generate? What am I doing? How am I looking today? And so that level of analytics is happening inside the teams. Okay, well, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
You have a great afternoon.